Major Ernst James Nichols was a larger-than-life figure in school from 1936 to 53. Saji Nick, as he was called, was feared and respected by the boys. Almost single-handedly, he ran the non-academic side of school in all his years at Lovedale. For many OLs, Saji has ghost stories associated with his name. He is said to walk down the 67s followed by his dogs, to stride into Large Hall and play a few tunes on the piano, and so on. We are fortunate to have these tributes to Saji by some OLs who were drilled and taught by him. Let's start with the recollections of Mr. Derek Gore, who was in school from 1939 to 41 and from 1943 to 47. This is read out by Sham Nair, class of 2002.
Having left school at the end of 1947 for the United Kingdom, over 73 interesting years ago, I find my recollections of details and events concerning Saji Nick have faded in the mist of time. In a wider sense, my contact and fading memories of Saji relate to the period in the 1940s when he returned to school after being called up during World War II to apparently take charge of Italian war prisoners and other detainees. He returned to Lovedale in 1945 as Major Nichols and immediately gained the confidence and respect of every boy. I was never chosen by him to be his personal assistant, but over 1946 and 1947, my closest friend at school, the late Bendy Cook, was his right-hand assistant, and I became aware of some of the general issues in developing situations. I clearly remember my surprise when selected to carry the King's colour on all ceremonial occasions in 1947, but otherwise my memories are faint and linked to a general liking and respect for the man and his constant awareness of the need for order, certainty, obedience, and pride for every boarder. Every boy was aware of his presence throughout each day and behaved accordingly.
I knew Sergeant Major Nichols in 49 and 50. He was a stalwart and an icon at the school. A uniquely great personality who can never be forgotten. Single-handedly, he managed to keep the school running in spite of all the English instructors having left the school. My dad had taken us to the school to enroll us, my brother and me. The weather was cold during the month of January 49, chattering teeth and trying to keep warm. I think Sergeant Major Nichols was called to the headmaster's office at that time. Major Richardson, a Britisher, was the headmaster at that time. And incidentally, the school was still under the jurisdiction of the British in 1949. Knock, and entered Sergeant Major Nichols. He smartly clicked the heels and saluted in a typical army style, touching his peak cap. I forgot the code as soon as he entered the office. It was hard to resist focusing my eyes on him all the while. A middle-sized Britisher, clad in a semi-greenish brown uniform. He wore a battle jacket over his crisply ironed khaki shorts. His stockings were to his knees, with puttees over his solid army-type ammunition boots. He had a tie around his neck I'm not sure if he had any ribbons of service on his left chest, but it was a perfect, worn-out uniform, showing his experience. His pea-cap looked as though it has gone through many wars, battered but dignified. I'm sure he must have served in the British Army in the front lines during the Second World War. He wore his pea-cap with a slight tilt, making him look stylish and expressing authority, like General MacArthur. He stood straight, upright, as though he was at a parade. His complexion was British white, clean-shaven. He spoke English clearly, with a slight British accent. Each word crisp and clear, which is a requirement when you command a parade house. Major Nichols' personality was overpowering, and one tends to immediately, voluntarily treat him as a superior and an ultimate authority. He spoke very little, but with authority. He was polite but firm. He would touch down to the dormitory at night, and we knew he was coming, as the kiwi was given by the large number of his non-friendly dachshunds, who thought they were superior to us, since they belonged to Sergeant Major. We used to see them sniffing around, searching for clues as they entered the dormitory. The clatter sound from the toenails on the wooden floor was an alibi, and we would tuck into our blankets, pretend to be asleep. Major Nichols taught us shooting at the short range at .22 rifle range located near the tuck shop. He was a crack shot himself while he demonstrated to us. I thank him. I proudly wore the cross rifles and a crown acknowledged by the UK Rifle Society on my battle jacket sleeve to show off that I was a sharpshooter, including in the dining room and having a meal with us. PT and parades were his job, and he took it seriously and diligently. We could march in unison and walk chest up, chin in, which eventually made us walk upright throughout our life with pride. Major Nichols was the only person we had contact with throughout the day in this senior boys' school while I was there. He was a guide, the authority, the everything we are today. Disciplined, honesty, self-reliant, with decision-making abilities, and eventually the spirit of never given. What a personality. What a personality indeed. I can still vividly see him in person even today.
Mr. Denzel Prince, 1944 to 54, and Head Boy, 54, shares his recollections of Major Nichols. This will be read out by Mr. Koshi Verghese, class of 1980.
It was a matter of great prestige for the school that under the eagle eye of Major Nichols, the rifle shooting team won the Earl Jellicoe Sword and the Lord Milner Trophy, competing against teams from the entire British Commonwealth. The ace shooters proudly wore the crossed rifles with the crown and wreath on their battle jacket sleeves and on their Sunday uniforms as a symbol of their superior marksmanship. Sergeant Nichols commanded the parade for founders and trooping the colours in his inimitable manner. The church parade was a weekly feature, which Kevin Phillips has described in the last episode of Glimpses. The ceremonial parades for VIPs brought out the best in the boys and the girls. They were drilled to perfection by Major Nichols, who was a martinet for discipline. He was also responsible for the PT display and gymnastics, which was an event much looked forward to in the Founders' celebrations. As if all this was not enough, Major Nichols managed the armory, the clothing stores, the laundry, and the entire school grounds and estate. Yet, he found time to play the euphonium in the Western Orchestra and act in the plays of the Dramatic Society. All these responsibilities were undertaken with the support of the head boy, the vice head boy, and the school prefects. This was the practice for many years till Mr. K.I. Thomas brought in a new system with the housemasters for each house. On a personal note, Major Nichols was the best friend of my father, Mr. Victor Prince. My dad helped him with the school boxing team and the road walk and run. Major Nichols was a dynamic gentleman who took all the responsibilities with a puff from his pipe. Tobacco was his downfall. Old soldiers never die, they just fade away. The American humorist Irma Bombeck wrote, "When I stand before God at the end of my life, I would hope that I could not have a single bit of talent left and could say, I used everything you gave me." This sentiment would apply equally to Major E.J. Nichols in the context of his 13 years service to the Lawrence Memorial Royal Military School and later 4 years to the Lawrence School, Lovedale.
Next, Kevin Phillips, ex-Aravali, 1948 to 56, explains just how important Saji Nichols was in the setup at Lovedale.
I would like to pay tribute to Ernest James Nichols, military instructor who was born in 1897. He was a stalwart of the school and did most things. He was a military instructor in charge of drill, shooting, boxing, and premises, and also the grounds around the school. As the PT instructor, he was so short that he had to stand on a table to carry out the commands. And at one time, we were doing so badly that he knelt down on the table, looked up to the heavens, and said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." He commanded the trooping the colour and all ceremonial parades. This role was only taken up by the head boy after he passed away.
Another famous OL who knew Saji is Paul Sapapati, CVO, CBE, ex-Nilgiri, 1951 to 57.
I gained a huge amount from him in my later life for the military grounding that I did, the arms drill, the squad drill, the trooping of the colour, so that when I came to the UK and in 2007, I was greatly honoured by Her Majesty the Queen to be made Lord Lieutenant of the West Midlands, the first ever non-white person in 550 years. And I was in a very, for this lad from Chennai, to be in a very esteemed group of people, including Clive of India, who was the Lord Lieutenant of Shropshire, and Duke of Wellington, who was the Lord Lieutenant of Hampshire. So the grounding that Major Nichols gave, all the arms drill and squad drill and trooping the colour, I was hugely privileged to be able to witness the actual trooping of the colour by Her Majesty, as a guest of Her Majesty the Queen, as Horse Guards Parade. So that the military discipline, the military training that I had stood me in good stead later on in life, and as Lord Lieutenant I actually wore a Major General's uniform. So that was my grounding and my huge benefit that I got in knowing Major Nichols.
Major Nichols passed away in 1953. He insisted on leaving the hospital at Madras and being back in his beloved Lovedale shortly before his demise. Dr. K.V. Venugopal, ex-Aravali, 1955, pays his personal tribute to Saji Nichols.
What particularly struck the attention as far as our thoughts about Saji is concerned is his powerful commands on the parade ground. He used to stand on one end of the top flats, and his powerful commands used to reverberate around the whole top flats and should be clearly heard at the other end. Regarding his boxing training, he was a very tough boxing trainer. We had our boxing training in a room adjacent to the band room, just as you go down to the grass pitch. He used to teach us straight left, right hook, left hook, and right uppercut. It was so thorough that even at the ripe age of 82 years, I remember it very clearly. He lived, his residence was near the Kailas house, near the tuck shop. And sadly, one morning, he was found lying in a pool of blood, surrounded by his wailing pet dogs. And he was diagnosed as having cancer throat. He was given a ceremonial funeral. In all matters of Lawrence School Lovedale at that time, Saji was all in all. He was the be-all and end-all, and we remember him with love and affection. I conclude by praying to the Most High that his soul may rest in eternal peace in the mansions of everlasting rest.
But was Saji only about discipline and knocking order into the heads of boys at school? Paul Sabapathy, CBO and CBE, ex-Nilgiri 1951-57, recalls the human side of this great man.
The other side of Major Nichols that I wanted to talk to you about was the huge kindness and generosity that he showed to my mother, Mrs. C.K. Sabapathy, who was at Lovedale from 1950 to 1957, and she was headmistress of the prep school at Lovedale. My father had a kidney operation in 1951, and he came to recuperate in Lovedale in March 1952 to stay with my mother. And suddenly his other kidney failed, and he had to be rushed to hospital in Ooty, and he passed away. Where Major Nichols came in is that my mother was helped by everybody, having lost her husband at the age of 35. And Major Nichols said, "Mrs. Sabha, don't worry about the funeral arrangements. I will take care of everything." And so my father had a absolutely wonderful funeral procession from the school church, the Church of the Ascension, all the way down to the cemetery, about a mile and a half, where everyone was dressed in the Sunday best, and the body was carried by prefects taking it in turns, and with the school band playing funeral music, and my father was laid to rest at the church. Little did we know that 18 months later, Major Nichols would also pass away, and he had a full military funeral, and he is buried next to my father. So we as a family have a great debt of gratitude to pay to him for the help he gave us at that time. So every time I visit my father's grave, I pay my respect to Major Nichols. May both their souls rest in peace.
He was quite a character altogether, and when he died, his body was lay in state in the school gymnasium, and all three schools filed past the body. The body was covered in the Union Jack in deference to his British heritage. He was buried in the school cemetery with full military honours. The number one guard led the cortege and reversed rifles while the coffin was taken to the grave. There, the MRC contingent fired a volley of shots and sounded the last post. Thus ended a marvelous life.
With this, we come to an end of another episode of Glimpses of a Glorious Past, an informal history of the Loudon School, Lovedale. Thank you for watching.